Okay, look, let's start. Remember that you will receive a bit of participation and a webinar handout. Okay, if you don't, email us at formazione@mlaworld.com and I can get that out to you. I had a few requests, so I sent those out. If you haven't got one from a previous webinar, please let me know which webinar it is and I'll send it over to you. Okay. Teaching grammar, as I'm sure we know, is an essential part of an English teacher's job. I mean, it's not the only thing, but can it be made more interesting? Okay? Instead of the usual approach to teach grammar forms in isolation, you know, in the sense that we often think of teaching present perfect in one lesson and then, you know, contrasting it with past simple, whatever, okay? Can we show students how these forms will help them do things? This is, you know, another way of teaching grammar, okay? How can we encourage students not to just to identify the different tenses and forms, but to use them naturally, see how they fit together? Again, you know, it's not very realistic to be giving them tests and saying, explain the present perfect. If they can explain it, fantastic. If they can use it, that's the key. If they can't use it, then the explanation's not going to help us very much, okay? And just another thing to consider, why don't our grammar lessons include more communication? How can we make our grammar lessons more communicative, okay? Objectives we have every time, and I hope you'll be able to add variety to grammar lessons. So with this webinar, I hope you can think of some ways of teaching grammar that you haven't seen before. Understand and implement approaches to grammar that appear less often in course books. I'm not saying we can't use the course books, okay, or can't teach it in the traditional way, but you know, we can see some alternative approaches and particularly adapt grammar lessons to suit the needs of your students. So if your students are more visual learners, if they want to do more role play, more activity, more interactive activities, then we'll have a look at those sort of things today. Okay. So what is the traditional approach? Okay, so how do we generally present grammar? So if I give you a list of activities to do in class or stages, okay, how would you reorder these stages? Okay, so these are not in order. So tell me how you would put them in order. So you can just type in the chat. Okay, so we have students produce their spoken examples, teacher gives some spoken examples, students complete written exercises in the course book, a presentation of the form, for example, if we're talking about past perfect and or had it past participle, presentation of use, for example, past perfect, used to indicate past action, situation, or duration of a past action or situation. So which one would you start with? Put that number first. What would you go on next with? Yeah. Again, it's not necessarily, there's not a correct answer to this, but I want to see what you think are the traditional approaches. I would imagine that a lot of people, or at least the books, generally start, okay, J's in there, okay, would start with 4, the presentation of the form, would tell you the form, tell you the name, okay, and then probably move on to the use, to explain the use, okay, and then they do some written exercises, you get some spoken examples, and then the students produce their spoken examples, okay. Again, there may be varieties of this, but I would say Jay's correct, and that's the sort of way we generally do it. Again, some people are also putting in 2 at the beginning. That could be true as well. A lot of books and things introduce it also with an example. Okay, so it might be that you introduce it with an example and then go on to the form. Okay. Now that might be the traditional approach, but it follows what seems to be a logical order. It starts from an explanation to examples to control practice to freer practice. That's the way most course books cover it. Okay, it really does satisfy students' desire to see what they're learning. What I'm really saying is that it is possible for you to do a lesson on the present perfect and have given them the form, have given them some examples, have made them do some exercises, I've made them produce their own language. And at the end of that lesson, you can say, okay, we now know present perfect or past perfect or present continuous or whatever it is, whatever grammar point it is. Okay, not that we're only talking about tenses, but they can see, okay, we've covered that. So if someone talks about present past perfect, they can say we've covered that. Okay, it's also easy for teachers to see what structures have been taught and which haven't. Okay, I mean, I often, when I'm teaching a student for the B2 exam, I'll give them a list of the grammar points that they need to be comfortable with using, okay? Because I think they can identify those and say, oh, okay, I'm pretty familiar with that. Oh, I'm not really sure what get used to is, for example. Okay? These traditions are useful. Okay, so I don't think I don't want to get the wrong impression that I'm saying we're going to be looking at ways to avoid this traditional approach. We're going to give you some alternatives. Okay? But sometimes these traditions should be questioned. Okay? Today, we're going to look at what is known as a situational approach, one of the approaches we're going to be looking at today. We'll be looking at using to teach grammar, but it can be used for other aspects of language. So situational approach is not a way of just grammar teaching, it's a way of presenting information, to be honest, not even just language. Okay. So as you can see from its name, it aims at providing situations in which certain language is necessary. Okay. The grammar should always be the fundamental is that the grammar or whatever, even if you're not teaching grammar, the language, the words, the target language should always be closely linked to its use. So instead of us thinking, okay, now today we're going to be thinking about should or shouldn't, okay, or today we're going to be talking about used to, okay. Instead of that, we need to think about it as an approach. It's time that students learn to give, ask for, and receive advice. So in that case, we're going to be giving, the ability to use these forms, not because we want to check off these as a form that they need to know, but because we think, you know what, if they go to Britain, if they go to America, they're going to be asking for advice. They're going to be receiving advice. And it's best they know these forms so that they can do that. Okay. So it's not a checklist of grammar. Okay. So what we might want to do is start with the situation. It could be a real situation. It could be an invented situation. So it could be that students have to, if you had, for example, in a summer school, we might put students together that live in different towns and give advice. It might be, for example, students that have different interests. If they tell me about your favorite band, what music you should listen, what songs you should listen to, what songs you shouldn't listen to. Okay. Or it could be totally invented in the sense of, imagine that you are a tour guide for the moon. What would you give advice for? Okay. Think about, is this situation going to be presented orally or visually? Okay, it might be better than a written form. Okay, written, again, we have books because these are things that it's very easy to use in the classroom. But a lot of students aren't so great at paying attention to writing, so we can present it orally, visually. Okay. Students can realize that they lack the structures to describe the situation. Okay, so sometimes what's good is present this, what you need them to do, and they realize they don't have the language, and that stimulates them to pay attention, to want to learn that structure. Then the teacher comes along and says, this is how we can do it. Okay? This way, it's much better because the students, therefore, are not thinking about the structure itself. We're talking about first conditional. They're talking about, a possibility of something in the future. Okay. And that's going to be, when it sort of mimics the way that we learn a first language. Okay. I never learned first conditional, second conditional, past perfect, things like that in English. I learned how to say these things, and still my friends who aren't English teachers know these forms but don't know the names of them, right? And they speak them perfectly. Okay? Often it's a good way to get them to practice orally before a written explanation is provided. You may have a written explanation, so you may invert the whole process. Okay? Why would we use this? Okay, as I said, it mimics the way we learn a first language or how we learn outside the classroom. Often when we learn something, whether it's learning a language, whether it's learning how to do something, we usually learn something to do something, learn how to do something because we need to. Okay? If I need to cook for someone, I'll need to learn a recipe. Okay? I don't generally sit around learning recipes and then think about when I'm going to need them, or learn how to fix something in my house before it breaks. Okay. Also, the situational approach is great because students learn habits, not just the rules. It foregrounds the use of the language, not the memorization of the rules. So, there's some cases in which, you may even use the language slightly incorrectly because that's how native speakers use it. Okay? I'm not saying, we want to teach them the wrong thing, but we need to realize occasional errors might not interfere with the language itself. It presents students with a need, then the tools to solve the problem. So you're sort of mimicking the way we learn. Okay? I need to do something. Here's the solution. Instead of giving them a solution and then saying, oh, you might need it in this case. Okay? Also, the teacher is there to guide the students towards the correct use of the language. We're not saying, okay, everyone listen to me, should, shouldn't, let's talk about that. No, what you're sort of providing a situation, and then this teacher can encourage them. Obviously, the teacher needs to be there to just say what is correct. In the end, the teacher is maybe the only person in the class who can use it correctly. It really motivates students to learn. Okay? It becomes very clear now that they can do something new with that language. So at the end of the lesson, they realize, you know what? I couldn't give someone advice at the beginning of the lesson, and now I can. Okay? I wouldn't know how to say this thing in English before, and now I can. Again, in the chat, I'm going to put some things and I want you to match these. Okay, so we have expressing regrets, talking about daily routines, describing the differences between two cities, inviting someone to an event. Which of these forms would you use? Okay, so which one would you use would like for? Okay, which one would you use the present simple for? Which one would you use comparatives for? And which one would we use wish and the past perfect? Okay, so Bar said one wish. Okay, I think wish in the past perfect, so 1 and D for sure. Okay. Simona's got 2B. Okay, talking about daily routines, present simple. I would say yep. Okay. 3C, describing the differences between two cities and comparatives. Yep. Okay. And 4A, yeah. So 1D. Okay. So, I mean, this is an example that, as you can see, the ones that I put in first are the needs, and then later we've got the forms. Okay. So instead of starting with the structures, a situational approach will start with the needs. Okay. The structure is the solution, let's say. Remember that all this information is in the handout, so I'm going through it quickly, but don't worry, I've copied all of this. The handout is very long this week. Okay, so a lot of activities to do. Okay, a lot of links too. So if we're looking at the situational approach, okay, and I'm going to get you to interact here too. This is Kate. Okay, where is she? Okay, how does she feel? Okay, and why do you think she feels this? Did she take an umbrella with her? What do we think of her actions? Why? Okay, so what could we say about, what could we tell her to explain your situation. Okay. So what could we say about her? Write in the chat. Okay. Now there's many correct answers for this. Okay. Baha's got it. Okay. Should have. Give me a more specific sentence that we might say to her. Okay. Say to her, you, or say about her. Okay. I'm thinking about more, Gaetana, this is probably true, but I think more about the fact that she should have taken an umbrella. Okay, so we're talking about regret there. Okay, so this is an example of the situational approach. We provide the situation, we try to push the student towards using this language, but maybe they can't. Okay, maybe they just aren't able to use that, and therefore they realize what they're lacking, and then we provide it with to them. Okay, maybe they will know. Maybe some of them will know. Okay, so it's possible that some student you can use students to teach other students. Another way you could say she shouldn't have gone out without an umbrella. Okay, cartoons can be good for this. I mean, we looked at cartoons last week, but one example of the situational approach is a favorite book of mine. Maybe some other people know it, Making Sense of Phrasal Verbs by Martin Shovel. Okay, this is more about vocabulary, about phrasal verbs, of course. But what we can say is, if you can see that first example, breakdown. Okay, we have a man in his car. What is happening? Does the man look happy? Is the car going well? Then we have smoke coming from the engine. So we have, does the man look happy now? No. Is the car going well? No. Make a sentence describing what has happened to the car. Okay? Now, if they don't know that form of breakdown, then they won't be able to say it, except in maybe some other way. The car has stopped working. There is smoke coming out. The engine is not working. Okay? And then we can present it to them. His car has broken down. Okay? So what we're doing is we're presenting these. And again, it mimics the way that we learn things in real life, that we realize the need to be able to do something, and then we set about finding out how to do that. I mean, this is what we go to the hardware store and buy a new piece of equipment, a new tool, so that I can fix something. I generally don't buy the tool and then decide to fix something. Okay? Similar approaches could be used with present perfect, with for and since, wish, comparatives, past perfect, anything in grammar. Okay. Some other useful tools for situational grammar. Okay, timelines. I mean, we may one day do a lesson on drawings in the classroom. I've always got that half planned, this webinar, but a timeline, for example, in December 2016, Sophie will have been living in Paris for 4 years. Okay, so we have the future perfect continuous, quite a complex form, but if you can draw it with this past, future, now, December 2012, December 2016, the sentences, they sort of present it in a sort of situation, and you can work out from the timelines how it works. Mimes and acting, I'm sure everyone's done mimes, and those sort of things, great for vocabulary, also good for time. Okay, if we're talking tenses, things like that. Okay, props and objects. I'm sure you use pictures, but objects are great too. Okay, so if we have two toy cars, the blue toy car is bigger than the black one. Okay, you could take two animals. I often get two students to choose an animal independently and put them together, and they've got to come up with all the differences between those animals so that they can do some comparatives. Okay. Stick figures, pictures of people. Okay. I mean, you could say he has a broken leg, but you could say he has broken his leg. Okay. Present perfect. Why do we say he has broken his leg? Because we can see the result of it in the present. And so we can say that something happened in the past that affected the present. Okay, so present perfect is often thought like that. Okay? Someone has broken the window, okay? Or the passive, even the window has been broken. When to use the situational approach. Okay? It can be useful if you have some students in the class who may already know the target language. That is, if you're talking about used to, you might have some students who, I don't know, maybe they do English lessons outside of school. Maybe they have an English parent or, are just more keen on English. Okay? Can be used when students seem to understand the language, but they do not use it other than to complete exercises in a book. So instead of giving them an old test and saying, give me some examples of the present perfect, put these sentences or these verbs into the present perfect, get some situations and see if what you've been teaching them, maybe even in the traditional approach, now you can see if they can actually use those in real life, not just by giving them a whole lot of examples, but mixing it up. If you've been talking about present perfect, give them talk about things that have happened this week. Okay. See if they're going to be saying this week, then they really need to be using present perfect and not past simple. When the situation is clear and the target language is clearly the best solution to the problem. Okay, you need to be clear that you are giving them good examples, because if you give them the wrong examples, as they say in English, garbage in, garbage out. If you give them bad examples, they're going to give you bad examples back. Okay. Some things can you think of using the situational approach? Okay, so we had a look at should, and so should plus verb, so for present or future advice, and should have for past advice or regrets. Present perfect simple and present perfect continuous for duration. Okay, so you can draw pictures of someone 2 years later, they arriving in a city, living there, still there, and they can you can say, can you tell me a sentence? Past continuous, future continuous. If they understand present continuous, often you can shift that into the past and the future. Okay, so you could say, at the moment, what are we doing? We're studying English. Okay, last week at this time, can you tell me? Next week at this time, can you tell me? Okay, they might be able to use these. Again, it might not be best to introduce those topics like that, but at least if they've got some idea of it before, then you can stimulate them into actually putting it into use. Okay? Present perfect for past actions with present results. He has broken his leg, things like that. Yeah. Another thing we're going to look at today is guided discoveries. In many course books, there's a grammar section at the back of the book with rules on one side and activities on the other. I can think of English file is quite a common one, okay, where sometimes they just have the rules at the back. Sometimes they match them with those, and sometimes they're all throughout the book. It's great, but the rules page can be really difficult to focus on. Guided discovery activity is any activity which guides learners to discover rules or patterns in language. So instead of just saying, here's the rules, okay, see if they can generate the rules from observation. Okay? It requires some working out from students, not direct explanation of the rules. The theory is, and it's not always true, but often it's true, that discovering the rules and patterns yourself is more memorable than just being told them. I find that the more effort the students make in trying to do something, to try to understand something, first of all, the more achievement they feel when they get it correct. Okay? And second of all, because they put that effort in, it's going to remain with them a lot more. Okay, I mean, think about that. Anytime you've learned to do something, okay, if you play an instrument, if the music you teach yourself is often more memorable than something someone taught someone. Okay, Jay is correct that it doesn't always work, and so for sure, okay. I mean, we've all certainly had times when we've tried to teach something and tried to get people to discover it, and in the end, we just have to explain it ourselves. Okay, so I'm not saying it always works. It may take a bit more effort. Okay, but it can really emphasize the students to do it. Okay, so if we have an example here, we have my typical weekend. Okay, so if you have a look at this, So I'll read it for you if you like. I love my job, but I can't wait for the weekend to have some time for myself. On Friday nights, I often just stay in and watch a film on TV or on the internet. I hardly ever go out as I like to just relax. Sometimes I order a pizza. I never sleep in very late on Sunday mornings because I have to get up and do the food shopping for the weekend. I always go to the supermarket as it's very close to my flat, but occasionally I go to a shopping centre for something special. I love cooking, so I nearly always spend time in the kitchen trying something new. I often go out on Sunday nights with friends to a bar or restaurant, or occasionally I go to the cinema. Sundays are usually for relaxing, cooking, eating, and seeing friends. Okay? So, as I assume most people are English teachers here, what do you think the grammar point we're trying to teach people in this? Okay? Present simple, sure. I think there might be something a bit more associated with the present simple there. So, what are we looking at? Jay's got it, adverbs of frequency. Present simple, to be honest, as well, because they go together. Okay. But yeah, frequency adverbs, adverbs of frequency. You can see we've got a lot of them. Okay. Often, never, always, occasionally, nearly always, these sort of things. So, you could present that to students. Okay. So highlighted them there. Look at the highlighted word, always. Is it a verb, a noun, adjective, an adverb? Okay. Always gives information about. Okay. Does it give out information about frequency? Does it give out information about manner? Okay. Words related to, similar to always, are adverbs of frequency. Read the text again, find more adverbs of frequency and underline them in the text. So we had them all there before, but what I'm saying is it doesn't necessarily, you don't need to have to give them all the information to work out themselves, but a certain amount of information. If you're saying where does the adverb go in relation to the verb? Okay, does it go before or after? Okay, and then present them with some things. For example, generally it goes before the verb, but it goes after the verb to be, or an auxiliary or a modal verb. So present them with various sentences and see if they can work out the rule. Why does it go before this one? Why does it go after this one? Okay, these sort of things, is instead of just saying these rules, I think they sort of, if you get them to work it out themselves, it really helps. Get them to work out the difference between certain forms, even certain verbs. What's the difference between prevent and avoid? Give them some examples with prevent, some with avoid, and see if they can work out the difference themselves. Okay? They might not have a great explanation of it, but they might even just be able to generalize the rule. You could see if they can put the adverbs on the scale. Okay? So from always to never, okay? They could put them there and see if they get those correct. Okay? Instead of giving them the scale, remember this is called guided discovery. So it's not just giving them and saying you work it out. We're not giving them the job of teaching themselves English. Okay? We're still the guide. Okay? Look at these examples and complete the rules. So with main verbs, okay, goes before, after, okay, before, after verbs like, okay, these ones. Okay. So again, I'm not going to wait around for you to complete this. I'm sure you know it already. But these sort of things make the presentation of the rules into an exercise as well. Okay. A lot of books do this as well. So I'm not saying this is something you won't find in books, but it can be a great way of doing it because they have to make some effort. Why would we use this form? Why would we use guided discovery? Okay. You've seen that this approach still focuses a lot on the rules and patterns of grammar. So what advantages does it have over a traditional approach? Let me know in the chat. Okay. I think there's a few advantages. Okay. For the teacher, you don't have to explain the grammar yourself. It means that you're cutting down on teacher talking time. You're getting them to speak a bit. Okay. And to be honest, even if you're talking about grammar itself, they still get the opportunity to speak. Okay? The worksheet, with the choice these, gives them some opportunity. Okay. Don't worry, Roberta. Okay. Enjoy your guest. Okay. So you can get the worksheet to do some of it. You'll also frees you up. You can go around, help the weaker students, and the stronger students can teach themselves or help you teach the other ones. Okay. And again, you can sort of be there to answer questions, okay, instead of being the focus of the class. Okay. For the students, what are the advantages? It's more stimulating. Okay. The student has to think. You have to engage the student. Again, not always easy. You have some students who don't want to engage. Okay. But they need to start thinking, realizing that learning a language means them putting in an effort. Okay. They don't get too much information at once. You're not giving them hundreds of rules. You're drawing it out, a bit like what Gaetano said. It lasts for a long time in the sense that we can draw it out and they take it at their own pace, maybe. Okay? They can get work they can get help from classmates. So, why is it that the teacher has to be the only one? I'm sure a lot of teachers have students, when we have a mixed class, some of the students will be much better than other students. Those students can help the others and help them explain. And it should be more memorable, more satisfying, more fun. Okay. Another thing we can do is noticing activities. Think of a time when you learned a new word, which was curious in some way in a second language. What happened in the following days? Kept hearing the word all the time. Okay. Actually, the word was around before with the same frequency. It's like if I say to you, have you ever noticed how many white cars there are on the road? Maybe you've never really noticed. And then you go out and you realize, oh my God, I never realized how many white cars there are. 70% of the cars are white. Right? And something you've totally never noticed. The same, when you learn a new word in a language or a new grammar form, you're going to notice it all the time. Okay. So noticing is when the lights flash and bells ring when you come across this item again. Okay. So how can we promote this noticing? This is a really important thing. And again, it gives them good habits to, learn outside of the classroom. We can't expect that students are going to get fluent in a language or even have a high ability in a language with just the hours they have in contact with us. We've got to teach them good habits. Okay? So two things that the noticing activity should do. Okay? The learner, students, need to pay attention to new words, phrases, or rules for input to become intake, that is conscious. The learner needs to notice the gap between native speaker input and their own input. They need to realize that, these people can do this, I can't do that. So some things you can do, for example, deconstruction, reconstruction of text. Find a short, interesting text, deconstruct the text, reduce it to simple sentences, each with one piece of information. Give the deconstructed text to students. Students have to reconstruct the text from the sentences. Compare the result with the original text. Help students to notice the gap and analyze points of interest. Okay. So, for example, okay, Mr. Mulholland arrived at his hotel. The hotel was the most expensive in the resort. The mayor asked him to open the shopping centre. Building of the centre was completed recently. He agreed, but only if no meat was on sale. He's a strict vegetarian. Someone heard the mayor. The mayor was happy that Mr. Mulholland did not complain about the shoe shop. There is a lot of leather in the shoe shop. Okay, so we might have, on arrival at his hotel, the most expensive in the resort, Mr. Mulholland was asked by the mayor to open the recently completed shopping centre. He replied that he would only do so on condition that no meat was on sale at the centre, as he is a strict vegetarian. The mayor was later heard to say, at least he didn't complain about the shoe shop. There's an awful lot of leather in there. So, what are the things that we have here? So we have all those sentences, and then we've got the second, the paragraph on the right, which puts it all in context. What are the things there we've got? Yeah. Jay's a bit right, a little bit like you could do this the same way with reported speech. Okay, so they notice the transformations that are made. Okay, so what things are worth pointing out? Okay, these sort of things on arrival at. Okay, these are things that weren't in the left. Okay, the recently completed shopping centre. Okay, building of the centre was completed recently. Here we've changed that into an adjective for shopping centre. Okay, do so on condition that. Okay. On sale. Okay. Strict vegetarian. These sort of things. These are worth pointing out. You know, they might sometimes they're in the original, sometimes they're in the new one as well. What you can do this is with translations too. Using English in the mother tongue in the classroom can be really useful for clarifying differences. Okay. So what you could do, find two or even more short, authentic English texts appropriate for your level of the class. Half of the text gets one text and half gets the other. Students work in pairs to translate the text into Italian, usually, or whatever language your students are. Okay? Their first language. Group with different texts now swap their two Italian texts. They translate the new Italian text they receive back into English. Okay? Display the original text, the Italian translation, and the final English translation together. Okay? Put it on the whiteboard, whatever. Okay? There'll be lots to discuss with the class when you see the two versions together. You're not going to get the same one. Okay? And we're not expecting them to. Okay? In some cases, at higher level students, they may even have some interesting new translations, some expressions that may be even better. Okay? You could do it using translators like Google Translate. Okay? Find interesting text in English, use an internet translator to convert it into Italian. Okay? The result is weird. It's Italian, but sometimes with English syntax and lots of literal translations that don't make sense. This is, you know, whenever you do translations or try to find Google Translation, it's often you need to do a bit of work on it. Okay? You might want to try a few to find which one is right from the past. You can create interest in the topic of the text. So get them to, you know, going to be looking at some topics that might be in the news if they're interested in football, if they're interested in a new film or a singer or something that's happened in their town, okay, or something that's made the news, the coronation. Okay? Give the Italian text and students work out the meanings and translate it and then compare it with the original. Okay? Again, you could do it in the opposite way too. Okay? But I think, you know, we're not getting them to depend on translators. What we're actually saying is that it can be productive. Okay. Here we have something. I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to read all of this. Okay. But what we can have a look at is the translations. I mean, this is in the handout. So you can see the how we've, for example, just looking at that first sentence, cows summering in the mountains of Switzerland. Okay. You know, we have a verb, you can say to summer in. Okay. Here, it's a bit more, you know, we have to use a different verb and then summer. Okay. So that sort of thing, we can see, oh, English is in a lot of ways, English has this flexibility where you can sort of change a verb into a noun very easily. Okay? I doubt someone would, or at least a very high level English student would be able to translate that first sentence into that from Italian into English using that summary. Okay, but it could be different ways they do it, but you can show them the alternatives. An ARC lesson, okay, is have you ever said to a class, today we're learning about present perfect, only to be told, teacher, we know present perfect already. The problem here is that the learners aren't lying. The students aren't telling you, something untrue. Okay, they've probably had lessons on most of the grammar points. I know that in Scuola Media they are often done a lot of the grammar points, and then we start again in the Liceo. Okay, the first years of Liceo. Okay, but it's often because they need to revise it. They don't use it. Okay, they've been taught it technically, yes, but they've forgotten it. Okay, how can we demonstrate this to learners and get them actually using the grammar we're teaching? Okay, one way is this ARC, so authentic use, restricted use, clarification. Okay, here's an example. Okay, so we have, for example, the test teach test. Okay, authentic use, restricted use, clarification. Okay, restricted use, authentic use. Okay, so for example, okay, I'm thinking of going on a week's holiday somewhere in Italy. Do you have any advice on where to go or what to do? Feel free to tell me on the chat. Okay. However, I'm aware that tourists can be very annoying. Can you think of any rules for how to behave when I'm on holiday? Think about the laws, okay, customs or etiquette. Okay, so things I should do, things I shouldn't do. Okay. What grammar point am I trying to elicit from the discussion? Write your guesses in the chat. So tell me, what do you think I'm trying to make the students use? Again, maybe they've done this before, okay? But if you bring up this grammar point, which a few people are talking about it, modals, yeah, I would say something like should, okay, possibly must, mustn't, okay, but should is probably when we're talking about advice, laws, must, mustn't, things like this, okay. If you say, okay, now we're going to talk about must, mustn't, should, shouldn't, then students quite possibly are going to say, oh, we've already done that. Okay. But if you give them this situation and they can't do it well, then maybe they'll be a bit more patient with you when you start saying about how to use this. Okay. So, okay, we have some sentences here. So restricted use. Okay. So, okay, if you go to Bilbao, the Guggenheim Museum, it's so interesting. Okay. I'm going to skip through these. We're running out of time a little bit, but you can monitor how students complete these to see if they're giving this language. Okay, don't correct it immediately. Okay, so the clarification there. Okay, so you can give them the text on the left, and then they can complete the rules. Okay, when they use must, have to, mustn't, don't have to, should, ought to. So we're talking about modals, and they can put that in. So this is the clarification. Again, it is similar to the situational approach for sure. Okay, and it is this the idea that you're giving them the tools to do this themselves. Okay, they need to do this. Which form is the verb after a modal? Which one is used more in negatives? Okay, how can you make a sentence with these? So here we're clarifying it. Okay, going back to the restricted one. Okay, so they can go back and change their answers. Now that you've clarified it, they could go back and say, okay, did you make any mistakes? Do you want to check it? Maybe they could check their partners as well, or the work in pairs. Okay. Then authentic use. Now think about your hometown. What advice would you give people for the first time, visiting for the first time? What rules of politeness? Think of a top 5 for both categories. Okay. So now you're giving them a lot more authentic use, something that would also be useful. Okay. So first they heard some of it, then they needed to, or they had to think about it, then they got some clarification, now they need to use it. Okay. Again, these are not totally unknown for books to use these sort of steps as well. They should have an opportunity to use the discussion, okay, like at the beginning, and this time they will be using the correct language. The first time, they probably were not using the correct language. They were maybe saying, you have to go to this place. They, might be better to say you must or you should. Okay, it's been a long webinar, so we're coming to the end now. The approaches we've discussed may be integrated with more traditional approaches. So some structures and topics, may benefit from using the situational approach, others with more traditional approaches. So I'm not saying forget the books. The books, obviously, there's good books and there's bad books, but there are a lot of ways even of using the book. Sometimes it might be worth, doing the book even in reverse, looking at the text first and then going back to the rules later. These approaches, we have looked at this as ways of learning grammar today, but vocabulary and pronunciation can be taught these ways. Okay? In fact, I don't think these, and while these might be new ideas, new terms, I don't think they're new ideas. Okay, you probably use them particularly for things like vocabulary. If you're presenting your students with text and asking them, do you think that's an adjective, a verb, a noun, an adverb? What's it doing in this sentence? Do you think if it's an adjective, or do you think it's a positive adjective? What could be a similar word to it? Okay? What is this, a present form, a past form? What do you think it does in this sentence? Okay, so there's a lot of these things we use already, particularly with vocabulary. Okay? Pronunciation too, we expect students to learn sort of some pronunciation rules, even though there's a lot of exceptions. Okay? The key to using this approach is to tolerate the errors. Okay, the students will make errors, and you need to be careful that because we're reversing the order, we're not giving them the form and the rules first. You need to be tolerant with errors, because it's normal that they'll make errors the first time because they don't know how to do it. Okay? It can be hard for students and teachers, so you need to be tolerant. You can't correct them, okay, until afterwards, if they're making the same errors after they've been given all the information. Okay, I think the errors are there at the beginning as a sort of realization that they lack this language. Okay? Guided discovery doesn't throw away grammar explanations, okay, but it usually leaves it up to the students to deduce these. Hopefully, makes them much more memorable and easier to understand. Student, if it's a grammar rule in their own words, maybe they're going to be much more likely to remember it. Okay. Noticing activities promote noticing the gap between the native speaker text and what students can produce, and therefore they can sort of realize that, instead of passing the summer in the mountains, they could say summary. Okay? It might not be something they would ever have heard of before, but they can now say, okay, now I know 2 ways of saying this. Sometimes a sentence that might be in the active in English in Italian might go into the passive, or in personal might go into the passive in English. Students might translate it literally, but we need to say, why do you think they're using the passive here? You can use these with Google Translate, okay, these forms. An ARC lesson in the form of teach test. I'm going to show you how much students can do and actually produce a given grammar point. Okay? You can use these a variety of different approaches. Okay. These are really useful for students who are struggling to progress. Okay, that is, maybe students who can tell you the rules, but they can't use the language. Okay, they're not. They when you ask them for examples, they give you the examples that you gave them earlier. Okay, I always try to get my students to write something about their own life. Okay, if they're talking about should, then imagine they want to ask me about Australia, or they want to tell me about their own town. Anyway, that brings us to an end. Let me know in the chat if you've got ideas for future webinars. Okay, we've got some ideas coming up, but I would be very welcome to your own ideas. Please put them in the chat now, or you can email me. If you do need to email me about your certificate of participation or the webinar handout, which includes all the information here, please email me there at Formazione. Okay, I will get that to you. I've got a few out people during the week. Next week, we're going to be talking about science, a bit of a lesson. So whether you teach a little bit of science in your English classroom, or whether you're doing something, for example, a CLIL lesson, whether you're teaching science using English. Okay, so whatever you're doing, whether you're just an English teacher or whether you want to have to teach science as well, I think you'll find it really useful. Okay, please join us next week for that. Okay? Thanks a lot for your participation. I know it's been a long one. Okay? And so I think I hope you join us again next week. Okay? Goodbye, everyone. Bye.